welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. Today's video is going to be all about podcasts. I personally love listening to podcasts. I really don't listen to a lot of music. It's really hard for me to find new music. I'm not really good at finding artists or following up on artists that I like when they release new music. So my music taste pretty much consists of things that I hear on TikTok and things that I listened to in high school. And that's pretty much it. But I really do love listening to and watching podcasts. I think podcasts are super interesting, and the podcasting space is really just now taking off and starting to grow, and there's a lot of potential there. So I thought it would be fun if I shared my list of my favorite podcasts. Now, some of these might be hot takes and some of these might not be interesting to everyone because these are what I like to listen to, and these fit my personal niches and categories of things that I search for when I listen to a podcast. So I have my computer over here where I compiled a list of all of my favorite podcasts, and then I also have Spotify pulled up, which is where I listen to podcasts, and then I also watch a lot of them on YouTube. If they have a video, I'll tell you what I like about it, and just give a background on the topics and things that they talk about. So then if you're interested, you can go and listen to it too. So let's get into it. The first type of podcast I want to talk about are celebrity news and pop culture podcasts. And the first podcast on this list, of course, is The Morning Toast. So The Morning Toast, if you've never heard of it, is a morning show done Monday through Friday by two sisters named Claudia and Jackie Oshray. They live in New York and they are absolutely hilarious. They cover pop culture news, celebrity news, sometimes they do business news, and sometimes they'll talk about things that are happening in the world, whether it's good or bad, but they provide really good insight and they give their opinions, which of course is not fact, and they state that. But this banter between the sisters is absolutely hilarious, and they do a really good job of keeping me abreast, and if you're a toaster, you'll get the joke, on the happenings in pop culture and celeb worlds. They also do some segments, including Dear Toasters, which is where they have their toasters write into an email address and they will give advice anonymously about their problems and things that people write in. And then they also do TV recaps. They watch pretty much every Real Housewives franchise and a bunch of other shows. They'll talk about shows that they're liking, brands that they're liking, their experiences, their weekends. They live in New York City, so they do a lot of fun stuff. And of course, as influencers, they get invited to a lot of cool stuff too. So the podcast is super entertaining, and again, they release daily episodes, which is a lot more than you would get from any other podcast that release a weekly episode. They also stream their podcast on YouTube, so you can watch a video element if you don't want to listen. I prefer to watch. I think it's really funny to watch them interact, and they have a lot of fun stuff, which I won't spoil because I want you to listen and watch the toast. But their studio is absolutely stunning, and sometimes the girls bring their dogs, who of course are the stars of the show. So they do a really great job of providing quality content every single day, and they also communicate to their audience if they're going to be taking days off for vacation or for religious holidays or whatever the reason might be. So they do a really good job of making sure that they have content to provide for the people who rely on them for daily episodes. But if that's not enough, you can also subscribe to their Patreon, which I do as well, and you can pretty much access every single audio and video episode they have posted previously. They post vlogs, they do Get Ready With Me, they do Q&As, and they are just absolutely stunning and smart and beautiful. So if you listen to the toast, you'll know that joke as well. But 10 out of 10 recommend The Morning Toast. And like I said, they do TV recap, but they do not watch The Bachelor or anything in the Bachelor franchise. But if you are looking for something along those lines, which is also affiliated with The Toast, they have the Toast News Network and their younger sister every single day. And they also communicate to their audience if they're going to be taking days off for vacation or for religious holidays or whatever the reason might be. So they do a really good job of making sure that they have content to provide for the people who rely on them for daily episodes. But if that's not enough, you can also subscribe to their Patreon, which I do as well, and you can pretty much access every single audio and video episode they have posted previously. They post vlogs, they do get ready with me, they do Q&As, and they are just absolutely stunning and smart and beautiful. So if you listen to the toast, you'll know that joke as well. But 10 out of 10 recommend the morning toast. And like I said, they do TV recap, but they do not watch The Bachelor or anything in the Bachelor franchise. But if you are looking for something along those lines, which is also affiliated with the Toast, they have the Toast News Network, and their younger sister, Margot Oshray, does a review podcast on The Bachelor. She covers Bachelor in Paradise, Bachelorette, Bachelor, and it's called The Snatchelor, so you can find that there as well if you are looking for something similar. She is absolutely as charismatic and hilarious as her sisters, so 10 out of 10 recommend the Toast and the Snatchelor to get your fix on pop culture, Bachelor Nation, and anything along those lines. The next podcast under the pop culture umbrella is Chicks in the Office. So Chicks in the Office is a Barstool affiliated podcast hosted by Rhea and Fran and their producer Noah, who is the third microphone. And it is basically very similar to the Morning Toast. It is celebrity news, pop culture, top stories, celebrity interviews. They cover pretty much everything that you need to know and things that you didn't even know you needed to know about pop culture and celebrities. They do a really great job of getting guests on as well. They have had some super big celebrity interviews. One of the most recent ones that's sticking in my brain is Tyra Banks. So I wouldn't necessarily have gone out of my way to listen to a Tyra Banks interview, but I really loved the dynamic they created between all three of them on the podcast, and it was just a really great interview. So the two of them do a really good job getting guests and hosting the podcast. They also do a segment with their viewers called Beat Rhea and Fran, which is just like pop culture trivia, and their viewers can team up against the two of them to see who knows more, and it gets really competitive, and it's absolutely hilarious to watch the friendship play out between Rhea and Fran. The two of them are actually best friends in real life, so they do a great job of portraying that through their podcast, and their podcast also has a video element. They have a great studio up in the Barstool office in New York, so I recommend watching their podcast as well as listening to it. They are absolutely hilarious, and if you want to see the face behind the third microphone in producer Noah, then check out the video on their Chicks in the Office YouTube channel. The next topic of podcast I want to talk about are celebrity/influencer podcasts. Now, I know there's a million of these, and it seems like a new celebrity or influencer is making a podcast almost every single day, but I have a list that I want to walk you through and talk about and explain why I like listening to these influencers and their podcasts. So the top one on my influencer/celebrity podcast list is Fun on Weekdays by Jenna Palek. She is a TikToker who emerged in this last year. She lives in Austin, Texas, and she has pretty much covered everything in her life in the last year and a half, which is her starting her TikTok journey, moving to Austin, Texas, starting her full-time job, and growing up as a 23-year-old, and talking about her life experiences. So I'm going to read her podcast description on Spotify because I think she does a really great job of explaining what to expect in Fun on Weekdays. So Jenna Palek, a 23-year-old from Ohio, is a fun-loving girl living in Austin, Texas. Although she works a 9-to-5 job from Monday to Friday, she chooses to live life to the fullest by changing up her routine and trying new things. The Fun on Weekdays podcast gives you a look into Jenna's life as a 20-something city girl who's all about having fun every day of the week. I really love this podcast because I'm obviously in the same space in my life. I work a 9-to-5, but she has really inspired me to get out there and not just live for the weekends while I'm working. She has a motto: you can have fun on weekdays too. She posts about, going out and drinking, or going to the movies, or getting dinner, or going to an escape room, or doing something along those lines on the weekdays, because you don't have to wait until the weekend for your life to start. I think she has a really great message, and she is really true to herself and down to her roots about who she is. This is funny because her podcast has actually changed because she quit her 9-to-5 job that she used to have, and now she is podcasting full-time, but she has made it a really conscious effort to continue to talk about how Fun on Weekdays is a mindset and not just because she had a 9-to-5 job, that she had fun on weekdays. Like, it's truly a lifestyle and a mindset that you have to work on developing and continuing through your life, no matter what stage you're at. So I think this is a really great podcast if you are looking for that type of big sister advice and that type of feeling that somebody's going through the same things that you are and you're not struggling alone. The next influencer podcast I want to talk about is Planbri Uncut, hosted by Miss Brianna Chicken Fry from TikTok, or Brianna LaPaglia. She is absolutely one of my favorite influencers. I just love how transparent she is about everything she goes through in her life, whether that's, you know, things that happened to her while she was growing up, or her long distance relationship, or, you know, being in college, dropping out of college, working full time, being an influencer. She advocates for a lot of things like mental health. She has been really active recently on social media about sexual assaults that have been going on college campuses, and really advocating for those victims. She really uses her platform to be transparent and to be a good person. Her motto, you know, is sleep when you're dead, be a decent human being. She is known to be a partier and for having a little bit of a good time all the time, but she also does a really good job of spreading a positive message about, you know, being kind to everyone, no matter who they are, what they look like, and she's just a really great person, and I absolutely love getting to know her on her different podcasts and on her social media. So Planbri Uncut is pretty much like an hour of therapy with Brianna. It started off, you know, as the TikTok drama podcast, and she rebranded it into being her true authentic self, and I absolutely love tuning in every week to hear what she has to say and to hear the way that she interacts and interviews her guests. A lot of her content is college focused. She's on those college tours right now, but I absolutely love listening to her, and I love her personality and the way that she interacts with other people, and the way that she comes across on her podcast is absolutely entertaining and great to listen to. So you should definitely check out Planbri Uncut. The next celeb/influencer podcast I want to talk about is Anything Goes with Miss Emma Chamberlain. So of course, Emma Chamberlain is probably one of the most widely known influencers, whether you watch her content or don't, but her podcast is extremely good. She has grown and developed so much over the time that I've been a fan of her. I remember watching her first YouTube video ever, which I feel like everyone says like, oh, I was a fan from the start, but her first ever YouTube video, I don't even know if it's still up on her channel, was a lookbook, and it came up on my YouTube recommended, and I clicked on it and I watched it, and then I subscribed to her, and I've been watching her ever since. And it's been crazy to see how much she's grown up and how she has personally handled being in the spotlight and being famous at such a young age, and she has done it so gracefully, which I think is so cool because we don't really see that very often from an influencer. And she is very raw and unfiltered on her podcast as well. She talks about whatever's on her mind. Obviously, if you follow Emma Chamberlain, you know she's an advocate for mental health and all the struggles that she went through growing up. She talks about that as well. She just does a really great job of being herself, and that says a lot because so many people love her and follow her. It's crazy to see her, how well spoken she is, and the advice that she gives on her podcast. I was actually listening to her latest episode today, and she was talking about quality over quantity, whether that's quality over quantity in terms of how many friends you have or material items that you have. And I was just sitting there listening to somebody who's younger than me give me great life advice. So if you are an Emma Chamberlain fan, or if you're not an Emma Chamberlain fan and you don't understand what the hype is about, listen to her podcast and get to know her a little bit more, and maybe you'll see. The next influencer podcast I want to talk about is Happy Hour with Gretchen Geraghty. So Gretchen is a YouTuber. She has been on YouTube for as long as I can remember. If you're an OG, you remember Gretchen Loves Beauty, which used to be her channel name. Now it's just Gretchen Geraghty, but she posts lifestyle and beauty content on her social media. She is a vlogger, and she also has her podcast where she pretty much is raw and unfiltered and talks about the things that she struggles with, things that she loves. She gives relationship advice, friendship advice, talks about personal experiences, about 2 years ago, her dad passed away pretty unexpectedly right before she graduated from college. So she talks about, you know, losing somebody that's close to you and somebody that's important to you, how to cope with loss and how to, you know, have those tough mental health days and, you know, continue to go on while also remembering that, you know, this person is always in your life. They might not be here, but you know them and you love them and they're always going to be there for you. So she does a really great job of offering advice and just kind of being that big sister that I never had. Again, I really like influencers who are true to themselves and have proven that over time they haven't changed. I've been watching her for a lot of years and she hasn't changed at all. She's become even more open and authentic on the internet with everything she's gone through. So you should definitely check out her YouTube channel and her social medias as well. The last podcast on my celeb/influencer podcast list is Gals on the Go. Gals on the Go is hosted by two influencer best friends, Danielle Carolyn and Brooke Michio. They are both YouTubers who now live in New York City, but when the podcast started, they met at college where they were both doing YouTube full-time. They attended the University of Georgia, and they sprung this idea of having the podcast to kind of talk about how they live this on-the-go lifestyle between being a full-time student and being a full-time influencer. So, you know, they'd be in class on Thursday afternoon and then they'd catch a flight for a brand trip the next hour later. So they do a really good job of talking about their life experiences and how to live this on-the-go lifestyle, not necessarily in terms of being an influencer, but, you know, taking advantage of all the opportunities that come your way and how to maintain a positive and happy mindset when things don't always go as planned. But this is kind of a new era of the podcast because Danielle just moved to New York City where Brooke has been living for the last year. So now they are back podcasting in person and they are experiencing their life as young influencers in their 20s living in New York City. So it's been a really great shift in the tide of the podcast and it's been great to have the two of them back together. You can see a lot of behind the scenes and the work that they do for their podcast on their individual YouTube channels. Like I mentioned, they are lifestyle/beauty content creators and they've been on YouTube for 10 plus years now. So they definitely provide a lot of great content and a lot of insight to the influencer world. It's really authentic to watch them grow up and experience these things together as super close friends. So definitely check out their YouTube channel and their podcast. I also wanted to share a couple of honorable mentions for this list. These are podcasts that I'm not waiting for their episodes or their videos to drop, but I will listen to them if they have interesting guests or if the video/episode comes up on recommended or things that I should listen to, or if I've already listened to all the podcasts that I like to listen to for the week, I will go see if they have an interesting looking episode, but I'm not subscribed to them and I don't listen to them every single week. So the first one, which might be kind of a hot take, is Cancelled by Tana Mongeau. I actually have really liked listening to this podcast when she has certain guests and stuff on. I think it's a really great insight to Tana if you only know her as, the crazy partier or the cloud chaser that wants to be with everybody, but she's super well spoken and she proves that she's actually super well educated, and she does a really great job of interviewing her guests and showing a different side of her that you don't typically see on her TikTok or her social media. I think those forms of social media are a quick glimpse of the best points or the funniest points or whatever's going to get you the most views and clicks, but with her guests and her two co-hosts, which are her best friends Brooke and Hunter, they really do a good job of bringing out a different side of Tana, which I would have never expected to be a fan of. I never really watched her content or cared to follow her that much, but I really do like listening to her podcast, and I think she does a really great job of showing her authentic self. The second podcast I had as an honorable mention on my list is Unhinged by Klemens. I've been a casual fan of Klemens for a really long time. I think he's super funny and I watch his YouTube videos on and off, but his podcast is super, super great. I think it's awesome because you never know what you're gonna get from him. Like, he truly is unhinged. Like, he'll say whatever's on the top of his mind, but it's also really structured. He has certain segments that he does every episode. Like, you can call in and leave voicemails and he'll respond and give his advice. And then there's the rant segment where he has 4 minutes and 20 seconds to rant about whatever topic he wants to rant about. And then they typically play a game. Like, he's tasted celebrity alcohol brands before. And he does a really good job of talking about serious topics. Also talks about mental health a lot. He does a charitable organization every episode. He'll call out an organization that you can donate to, and he'll talk about the cause and why it's important to donate to this organization. And he does top stories as well, so he'll talk about current happenings in the world and news and give his opinion and stuff. So I really do like Unhinged by Klemens, and I find myself looking for episodes more often than not. So the next topic of podcast I want to get into is comedy. So the first comedy podcast I have on my list is the Tiny Meat Gang podcast with Cody and Noel. So I've been listening to Cody and Noel for as long as I can remember. I mean, back when Cody was on Vine, like Cody and Devin Go to White Castle was my favorite series on Vine. And then when Cody and Noel met working at Fullscreen, and Cody was doing Insanely Chill and having Noel on as a guest pretty much every single episode and doing the weekend editions, it was clear that the two of them like absolutely had a great dynamic and they were hilarious. So now their podcast has been going for like 4 years and they have so many long-term running jokes with their fan bases, and they are just absolutely hilarious. They are now doing their podcast from space. They have this really super cool set that looks like a spaceship, and they have a lot of cool technological additions that they can do during their show. It's just a great hour of pure entertainment and laugh. So check out Tiny Meat Gang podcast with Cody and Noel. The next podcast on my comedy list is Zane and Heath Unfiltered. So I know this might be a little bit of a hot take depending on how people feel about the Vlog Squad, but I really love Zane and Heath. I think their friendship is absolutely hilarious, and their content for as long as I can remember has always been super funny and always been super sarcastic. That's my type of personality, and I am very sarcastic myself, so I'm really drawn to that kind of humor, and I really love the production behind their podcast. So their podcast is hosted by the two of them, but also Matt and Mariah, who are their friends and part of the Vlog Squad as well. Mariah and Heath are boyfriend and girlfriend, so I just really love the dynamic between the four of them. Heath and Zane have been doing coffee talk for as long as I can remember. They used to post about it in their vlogs all the time. They would get in the car and they'd go drive to get coffee, and then they'd sit with their coffee and just say whatever was on their mind, and that's exactly what Unfiltered is. It's absolutely hilarious. Their video element is also super awesome. They have an amazing studio that is really stunning and super cool, and now is the perfect time to get into Unfiltered because their third season is just about to start. They are on a 2-week break at the time that I'm filming this, and they will be back for season 3, and they were hyping up something exciting and new at the end of season 2. So I like to watch the video elements that come out every Tuesday, but the audio version of the podcast drops on Monday. So if you are interested, definitely check out Zane and Heath Unfiltered. The next podcast on my list is Only Friends, hosted by Carly and Aaron. I'm not sure if this is entirely a comedy podcast because, not that they're not hilarious, but it's not like they're doing bits and going back and forth and kind of having like that open dialogue. It's more of a structured podcast between the two of them, and they talk about pop culture, what's going on in their lives. They share stories. They read a lot of Am I the Assholes from Reddit, which is super hilarious, and then they give their advice on whether they think the person is being an asshole or not. But I really like their podcast description, so I'm going to read that to you so you can understand what to expect from the podcast. But two millennial best friends and digital creators share their very different life experiences in their weekly podcast episodes. They'll talk about anything and everything from their daily lives to pop culture and any random shit going on in the world, all while being unapologetically themselves. And that is why I really like Carly and Aaron. Again, this might be kind of a hot take because they're part of the Vlog Squad, but to me, they're two of the Vlog Squad members who are actually truly authentic and truly stick to themselves. I've been watching them since they've pretty much moved to LA and kind of started to become part of the Vlog Squad. I've been watching their vlogs. They have a joint YouTube channel, Carly and Aaron, and then they both have individual YouTube channels that they post on as well. And I think their content is just super authentic, and they're not afraid to say what they want to say because that's what they believe in and that's who they are. So I think this podcast is really great, and I love seeing that they haven't changed over the years that I've watched them and followed them. So I really appreciate their podcast a lot. They also have a video element, which I prefer to watch their podcast as well. I think it's great to read the emotion and just see the way that they interact. They have a really great friendship between the two of them, which is where the spin-off of the title comes from. But I definitely recommend this podcast, especially if you really don't know much about Carly and Aaron or anything about the Vlog Squad. Like, get into their videos and get into their content because they provide a really great community, and they also have a Patreon similar to the Morning Toast, so you can subscribe to their Patreon for extra content, extra videos, vlogs, audio episodes, and everything. So yeah, love Only Friends, definitely check it out. The next topic of podcast I want to talk about is Barstool Sports affiliated podcast. So like I mentioned earlier, Miss Brianna Chicken Fry, she works for Barstool, and I have really gotten into her and her content, and from there that led me into more Barstool podcasts. And she is a host of 2 other Barstool podcasts, so I want to start with one of them that she is a host on, and it's called Because We Got High. She hosts this podcast with Kelly and Rhea from Barstool, and they talk about every topic you could want to talk about from A to Z. So every episode is a different letter of the alphabet. They're on season 2 currently, so the first season they did 3 different topics for each letter, but now they're just sticking to one. And they sit there, talk about the topic, and they have conversations that people might be uncomfortable having or might not want to talk about on the podcast around the different topics. So I'm going to read some of the topics that they had. So the last episode they released was L, and that was luxuries. The one before that was K, they did kissing. The one before that was J, and they did jokes. So they do a really good job of keeping it entertaining while changing it up. These are all different topics that they didn't talk about the first time around when they went through the alphabet. So the dynamic between the 3 of them is absolutely hilarious, and they all have very different personalities and different stories to tell, whether that's from their childhood or whether that's from when they went out the night before filming. So definitely check out Because You Got High if you just want like a comfortable friend group sitting around talking about these topics and just being unfiltered and contemplating the meaning of life. Obviously the topic, or the title I mean, gives off smoking and drinking vibes, like partying vibes, but it's more of the like mindset of like when you do smoke or when you drink and you just sit there and you sit with your friends and you're like, oh my gosh, what's the meaning of life? Like having those deep conversations that have no meaning but also have meaning. So if you are interested in checking out a podcast like that, definitely check out Because We Got High. The next Barstool podcast I want to talk about is BFFs, featuring Dave Portnoy, Josh Richards, and Brianna Chicken Fry. It's as interesting as the title sounds. It is a TikTok / pop culture drama podcast where they talk about all the things that are happening on TikTok and drama within influencers and celebrities. They get some pretty high profile guests as well, popular TikTokers, popular celebrities, and they do a really great job of interviewing their guests. I personally like this podcast because I really like Brianna Chicken Fry, obviously. Her personality on this podcast is very different than her personality on her other 2 podcasts, which, I mean, that doesn't mean that she's different and she's, you know, not the same or whatever, but she is more of like a voice about the TikTok side of things than she is a host, but she's grown into her role a lot more. She's a lot more talkative, she's a lot more comfortable with Dave and with Josh. It's obviously an interesting dynamic between all 3 of them, and all 3 of them are very unfiltered and raw. Like, they say what's on their mind, they say their opinions, and it's really funny to watch them all, you know, get into like little qualms and argue about topics and people and things like that. So if you were interested and you haven't checked it out, definitely do. They brought a different audience to both of their current existing platforms. Obviously Dave runs Barstool Sports, and Josh is one of the biggest TikTokers over in LA, and Brianna and Dave are in New York. So there's definitely a interesting dynamic between all three of them. They break the popular news, or they have the top stories and the top creators on while the drama is popular. So definitely check out BFFs if you're interested in like TikTok drama and pop culture drama, because they're always on top of it. The next Barstool podcast that I want to talk about is Cutting Stems. So Cutting Stems is super similar to the Snatchelor, which I talked about earlier. It's a Bachelor Nation podcast where they cover Bachelor in Paradise, Bachelorette, Bachelor, and they do a live show after every episode. So after Paradise, they were doing episodes Tuesday nights. They were streaming them on YouTube and talking about what happened in the episode, you know, the drama, the couples, the people, everything like that. So if you are looking for a live show right after The Bachelor, Bachelorette, whatever is happening, they are a great commentary. It is hosted by Rhea, Fran, Kelly, and Trent, who is another Barstool employee, and it is really interesting to see him in the dynamic between the three girls and his opinion on The Bachelor and the drama and The Bachelorette, because he's actually a huge Bachelor fan and a huge Bachelor Nation fan. So it is super interesting because he's well versed, he knows people from previous seasons, and he provides a really great opinion from a guy's point of view that you wouldn't expect to get on a Bachelor review podcast. And then it's called Cutting Stems because at the end they cut the stem of the rose of somebody from the episode, you know, that caused the most drama or that was annoying or whatever it is, and then they hand out a rose to whoever they think was like the star of the episode or the person who deserved it. So if you're looking for a fun, lighthearted Bachelor/Bachelorette, Bachelor in Paradise review podcast, they will be starting back up for Michelle's season in a couple weeks, so check out Cutting Stems. The last podcast I have on the Barstool Sports/Barstool affiliated podcast is Call Her Daddy, which I know could be a hot take or problematic because of the drama that went down between Alex and Sophia and the type of topics that they talk about, and just like the podcast in general has been controversial from the start. But I actually didn't listen to Call Her Daddy before everything went down, before the drama, before Alex became a single father. I only started listening to after that era, and I think the reason I started listening to it then and not before, because before I wasn't really into the topics and the way that they talked about some of the things and the tones that they use in their voice. I know it was supposed to be comedic and they wanted people to pick up on it, and then they started to become more raw and authentic, but Alex has really become completely open, and I think she's become more of a feminist, in my opinion, than she was before. And I think this podcast now has really paved the way for a lot of conversations that people didn't have or weren't having or were scared to have about being a woman, being a feminist, and sexual topics. I think she has done a really great job of educating her community on different areas by bringing on certain guests and having these open and raw conversations with people like Mia Khalifa or people that you wouldn't necessarily see on this kind of platform. So I think Alex has really turned the message of Call Her Daddy around, and I have really enjoyed the conversations that she's had with her guests. I mean, sometimes they make me emotional, they bring me to tears, and I think this line in her Spotify description is really important. It says, "This woman-led empire produces raw, relevant, and provocative conversations that promote sexual liberty and personal empowerment while stripping away any barriers of judgment." And I think that's the important part, because when she tells her stories about things that she's done, there might be judgment on women, because there always is when it comes to sexual topics, you know, like, oh, well, she dressed that way, like she was asking for it, or she is such a slut because she slept with this many people. And I think she's really erasing that mindset, and she's showing, like, I do these things too, it's okay if you do, or it's okay if you don't. Like, here's these conversations that we need to have about respecting people, respecting their beliefs, respecting who they are, respecting the choices that they want to make, and like, it's okay, like, nobody's gonna judge you for being you and for being who you are, no matter what form that comes in. So I think conversations that she's been having and the way that Call Her Daddy has turned around in the single father era has been absolutely amazing, and I personally enjoy listening to her podcast, so that's my hot take on Call Her Daddy. I would recommend it if you haven't listened to her since then, or if you didn't like Alex Cooper before. I would say give it another chance and see if you like the new single father Eric Alex. So yeah, the last topic of podcast that I want to talk about is hockey podcasts. If you don't know me personally, I absolutely love hockey. I'm a big hockey fan. It's my biggest hobby. I am so excited. The NHL season is going to be starting here in the next couple days, and I am just really excited to have a full 82 game season back. But I do consume a lot of hockey content on top of all of the other content that I consume, and I love some good hockey podcasts that I want to share and talk about. So the first hockey podcast that I want to talk about is actually another Barstool affiliated podcast, and this is Spittin, Chicklets. So Spittin, Chicklets is hosted by former NHL players Ryan Whitney and Paul Bissonnette, and then it also includes a Barstool writer, Rear Admiral, and their producer, Mike Granelli, and they talk about everything you would want to talk about when it comes to the NHL. They give their opinions and their stories, their personal stories from being in the NHL. They talk about their favorite teams, players, current news, anything that is going on in the NHL, like they're on top of it. They're really well known amongst players. They have players on as guests all the time, even during the season. So some of their guests will be, currently on the road for the season, and they'll be talking about, their last couple of games. They do a really good job of covering all the teams. They try to talk about everything pretty fair, and they don't have a lot of bias, which I appreciate, because obviously as a hockey fan I have bias to my own team, but they're all in a position to not really have any bias, and they have a really great insight on focusing on pop culture but within the NHL. So I really love Spittin' Chicklets, and I 10 out of 10 recommend them if you're looking for a hockey podcast. The last two hockey podcasts I want to talk about kind of go hand in hand. First up is the Steve Dangle podcast. So if you don't know who Steve Dangle is, he is kind of an influencer in the NHL space, which is kind of weird to say, but he is a YouTuber who posts about the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is one of my favorite teams. And he hosts a podcast with Adam Wilde and Jesse Blake, and they talk about pretty much all things going on in the NHL, but they do have a bias, which is why I think it's important to identify, and they identify it again all the time with amongst themselves. They obviously all live in the greater Toronto area. They're all Toronto Maple Leafs fans, but they do a really great job of talking about everything going on in the NHL, being open. They have reporters on as guests who cover different teams to provide insight. They do a really great job of providing opinions that are unbiased when it comes to the Leafs. And if you know anything about the Leafs, like, their fans and their fan base are their biggest critics. Like, we hate them more than anyone else, so we're the first people to judge them, but we also love them. Like, you can't talk bad about my team, but we can talk bad about our team. So they do a really good job of being very raw and open about, struggles of being a Leafs fan, and also the highs of being a Leafs fan. And then also being, reporters and media in the NHL, they get a lot of great insight on great events that are happening, like the draft or deadline day or the expansion draft that we just had this past year. They have really great insight, and they have great media friends who come on the show all the time. And one of those media friends is Chris Johnston, who they just added on as another show. So they are creating the Steve Dangle podcast network, which is great. And they now have the CJ show, and the CJ show is hosted by Chris Johnston himself and Julian McKenzie. Julian McKenzie is a Montreal based reporter, and then Chris Johnston is based in the GTA, but they are both very unbiased, and they're both very informative in the way that they come across on their show. So it happens 3 times a week, 30 minutes, and they talk about the current happenings in the NHL. CJ obviously has some great insight as being an insider, and Julian McKenzie does a great job of facilitating the show, asking the right questions, and it's just started. It's only in the second week, so definitely check out the CJ show if you're looking for quick bite-sized episodes on what's happening in the NHL and getting to know CJ and Julian McKenzie a little bit more. But back to the Steve Dangle podcast, like, the 3 of them have been doing this podcast for so long, and they just moved into a new studio. They're back doing the podcast in person after COVID. The season's coming back. It's going to be a great year. So if you're looking for a way to get into hockey, definitely check out Steve Dangle podcast. They do such a good job of explaining everything in the NHL, which can be confusing, like waivers and contracts and things. They do such a good job of making sure that the average person that might have stumbled across this video would understand what they're talking about, and they do a great job of not just being Leafs fans, but being hockey fans and advocating for the sport of hockey. So if you're interested in getting into hockey or getting any extra knowledge about the sport, check out the Steve Dangle podcast. It's a great way to become a hockey fan. All right, if you're still here, thank you. I know that was a lot, but if you are interested in any of those podcasts, definitely check them out. I have them all linked down below. But thank you for watching today's videos. Leave your favorite podcast if I missed any, or if you think there's any that I would want to watch based on what I recommended. Leave them down below in the comments, and yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye.